Hello everybody and welcome to the first entry in this year's spooky season. Last year, for the month of October, I made 4 videos centered around horror games, but this year we're cranking things up and we're making 9 videos centered around horror games, so make sure to subscribe so you can catch them all. But today, we're kicking things off with a bang, with Cronos The New Dawn. This is a game where the effort really shows. Bloober clearly poured a lot into the design, and it comes through in how the game plays and feels moment to moment. There are some genuinely impressive ideas here, ones that make the experience stand out amongst other modern horror titles. But, as the title of the video may suggest, there's also at least one major problem that holds the whole thing back, and I'll get into that in the second half of the video. But first, let's give credit where credit is due, because there's actually a lot to like here. The best aspect of Cronos The New Dawn is undeniably all the cats you can find that give you items, obviously.
This is highly perilous, even for you.
But beyond that, it's the combat. Combat in Cronos The New Dawn is firmly action horror. You're not overpowered, but you're also not helpless, and that balance is what makes the whole system click. Let's start with the weapons. The carbines don't pack enough punch to feel like a reliable mainstay in your arsenal, and the launcher, while strong, just doesn't give you enough ammo to depend on it. So most of your time will be spent with your starting pistol and one of the shotguns, depending on personal preference. And honestly, I actually feel like this is a good thing, because these two weapons feel fantastic to use. The pistol has a really nice weight to it, and when you line up a charged shot and watch it land, it is incredibly satisfying. The shotgun, meanwhile, feels brutal, close range encounters become intense, split-second decisions. Together, both of these weapons form the backbone of the game's combat, and they're tuned in a way that keeps the action tense but rewarding. The weapon feedback in the game is just generally really strong, and with the enemies bobbing their heads around as is custom for horror games like this, timing your charge and hitting an enemy clean in the face just feels so good. You've also always got to be moving around, as even the weakest of enemies can still pack a punch if you let your guard down. But you can't move too far away from the action, because the real genius comes from the merge mechanic. Enemies can actually fuse with corpses, creating stronger, more dangerous versions of themselves. And this mechanic is more than just a gimmick to try and separate it from other action survival horror titles. It changes how you approach every fight. You can burn bodies in advance to prevent live enemies from merging, but that will waste your torch fuel. Do you risk leaving the dead enemy and hope nothing spawns nearby? That constant calculation does factor into your thought process on a moment-to-moment basis, and if you run too far away from the enemies to heal or reload or just to center yourself, they could merge whilst your back is turned, and then you're screwed. And that is where the survival horror tension kicks in. Ammo is tight. It is painfully tight. You simply cannot shoot your way through every encounter. The game forces you to look at your environment for solutions. You've got explosive barrels, you can use your limited torch fuel, you can use your limited pyres. All of these become tools in your arsenal, not just background set dressing or options. It's a clever way of stretching your limited resources whilst making the combat encounters feel more dynamic. It's the best of both worlds. When you clear a room by luring enemies into fire or setting up an explosion, it feels earned. The overall effect is that combat never becomes mindless. Every encounter is a small puzzle where you're balancing the risk, you're balancing your ammo, and you're balancing your positioning. It makes even basic enemies feel quite dangerous, and that tension feeds back into the atmosphere of the game in a really effective way. And speaking of tension, the difficulty, I feel, is tuned just right. It's not designed to crush you or to punish you unfairly, but it does demand your attention. You can't just go in on autopilot. You need to stay focused, you need to react quickly and think about the bigger picture. That constant level of engagement keeps the experience really gripping for a decent chunk of the game's runtime. This isn't exactly the Dark Souls of horror games, but it will ruin your day if you're not paying attention. But combat is only half of the equation. The other one I feel that they get right is the atmosphere, and this is another area where Cronos just really shines. The lighting is excellent, you've got flickering lights, long stretches of shadow. It's used not just for mood but for tension as well, guiding your eye in subtle ways while still keeping you unsettled. You will always know where to go. The sound design plays right into that as well. You'll hear enemies before you see them, echoing somewhere in the dark, cackling in the walls, and that creates a constant sense of dread even when you can't actually see anything. Visually, the art direction is really strong too. Sure, some of the areas do look a bit generic, just some simple horror staples, but they look fantastic. There is a bleak beauty to a lot of the environments, from industrial corridors to more organic, unsettling spaces, and that consistency of style really helps to sell the world. An important thing to note is that all of this atmosphere ties directly back into the gameplay. The tension you feel in combat is amplified by the way the world looks and sounds. You're never truly comfortable, and that's exactly what you want from a horror experience. And then there is the story, or at least the way it begins. Without spoiling too much, the initial mystery is genuinely quite compelling at the start. The game drops you into this world without telling you a damn thing. You just go on, find the answers yourself, and you want to push forward and piece together the truth. That early intrigue does add an extra sort of layer to the gameplay loop, because it's not just about surviving the next encounter or finding the next save room, it's about uncovering what happened, what's going on, what are you doing and why are you doing it. The premise is strong, and it's one of the big reasons that the opening hours of this game I felt was some of its strongest. Horror games typically utilise their story as a method of rewarding the player. You made it through a tough combat gauntlet, you defeated a boss, now you get to watch the narrative move forward. Unfortunately, I don't feel it does enough of that, but we'll get onto that later. Cronos also mixes things up with some really well balanced puzzles. You've got these gravity sections where you're figuring out paths and orientation, you've got electrical puzzles where you're guiding a current to power up doors, and the anomaly puzzles that flip or alter the environment in some pretty interesting ways. What I really appreciate here is the level of challenge. None of these puzzles are overly complicated, but I feel like they're engaging enough to break up the action and keep the pacing varied. You're never stuck too long in a puzzle to get frustrated, really. And then there is the level design, which is another strong point. Now, I will talk later about how some sections definitely drag on too long, but in terms of how the spaces are actually constructed, they're excellent. Environments feel interconnected and deliberate, and you always have a strong sense of where you are and what you're supposed to be doing. That clarity is really important in a game like this, and Cronos pretty much nails it. There's also an extra layer of strategy thanks to the inventory system. Key items take up valuable slots, which can be very annoying, and I'll get onto that as well later. But having key items take up slots that could be used for ammo and stuff forces you to plan ahead and think about what you're carrying and what you may need to carry as you progress further. Now, before we get on to the stuff that I didn't enjoy about the game, if you are enjoying the video, then please consider subscribing, as we are trying to get to 2,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and we're cutting it a bit closer. Every single subscriber really helps and really would make me a very happy boy. But enough of that, let's start with what I didn't like as much in this game, and we're going to go back to the story. Because honestly, I feel like Cronos really stumbles here. The opening does a great job of pulling you in by not telling you that much. There's a mystery, there's a sense of unease, you don't know a bunch of stuff. Who are you? Where are you? What are you doing? Are you the good guy or the bad guy? There's a lot of questions, but other than the origins of your character, I didn't find any of the answers particularly satisfying. Instead of building towards these satisfying revelations, the narrative kind of fizzles out and then just dumps a twist on you that I won't spoil. By the end, the story sort of shifts into a much more human and emotional angle, which could have been powerful, but it doesn't land because the characters just haven't got enough going on for it to do so. They barely show emotion throughout the whole game, and then suddenly you're supposed to feel something at the end. It feels unearned. I understand it must be difficult to give much characterization to a character that doesn't have a visible face to the player, but at the end of the day, that's on the developers. They made that decision. I get what they were going for, the intention is clear, and if the story had been told differently, I think it might have been quite thought-provoking, but as it stands, there's just not enough characterization to give the ending any real weight, and it ends up being more of a letdown than a payoff in my opinion. The biggest issue though that Cronos The New Dawn has, this is the major problem, is in fact the length. My playthrough took about 16 hours, and that's with a good amount of exploration. In fact, I accidentally picked up every single collectible. I was really immersed in the game. But the main issue is that this game should have been 10 hours. Encounters start to feel repetitive fairly quick, and because of that, the tension fades. It has what I like to call the Dead Space effect, where you've been fighting the same enemies for so long and you do it so often that the initial fear just completely evaporates by the halfway mark. What was scary early on becomes routine by the halfway mark. Instead of dreading what's around the next corner, you're just thinking about how much ammo you're going to have to spend to progress. And when a horror game overstays its welcome, it doesn't just lose its impact, it actively undermines the good stuff that it built up in the beginning. And that ties directly into the lack of a fear factor. Cronos is a very atmospheric game, no question, the flickering lights, the unsettling sounds, the oppressive environments, but it very rarely tips over into being genuinely scary. Part of that comes down to the sheer amount of combat. When you're constantly pulling the trigger, enemies stop being scary and start feeling like ammo dumps. The tension turns into resource management rather than raw survival, and you become numb to the monsters themselves. Now, atmosphere alone can carry a horror game a long way, but when the gameplay loop makes you so combat focused, it's hard to stay unsettled because you know you can defend yourself, and the fear in this game, I feel, just burns out too early and it never really comes back. Then we have the boss fights, and we're not going to talk too much about these, but I did think they were pretty weak. The boss fight in the Abbey section is actually pretty good. It's different, it changes things up, and it feels like a fresh challenge, but the rest are all just the same formula. You shoot the glowy weak spots, you dump your ammo, you run away to reload or heal, and you repeat. They all work very similarly to that exact formula. There's no tension, there's no creativity, just bigger bullet sponges that interrupt the flow. And in a game that already runs too long, having bosses that feel this uninspired makes those sections drag even harder. Another thing that really wore me down was the bolt cutters. This tool takes up one of your limited inventory slots, and because you never know exactly when you're going to need it, you're stuck either wasting space carrying it everywhere or trekking back to a save room whenever you find a locked gate. It feels like unnecessary busy work, especially in a game where inventory space is already tight. It adds frustration without adding much strategy, and I thought that it really broke the flow of exploration. And then we have the bugs. I ran into a few situations where I literally got trapped in walls, forcing a reload, but the worst thing I had was after a main boss fight, I got halfway through the cutscene that followed the boss fight. Bear in mind, there's like a 2-minute walk after this specific boss before the cutscene, and then the game crashed. There was no autosave, there was no checkpoint. I had to replay the entire boss, so bear that in mind. I walked for around 2 minutes after killing this boss and then triggered a cutscene, got halfway through this cutscene, and not once did the game autosave. This kind of thing should not happen in 2025. There is no excuse for not having an autosave right after a major boss fight. Technical issues like that really pulled me out of the experience and piles frustration on top of the game being too long anyway. I shouldn't have to repeat bad sections of the game as well. It's not even like the boss fight was fun, obviously, so I had to trudge through it a second time and it was just not enjoyable. So here's where I land on Cronos The New Dawn. It's actually a good game. The combat is fun. The ammo economy is stressful but rewarding, and the level design is top tier. You can see the effort and ambition in every system. I was really rooting for Bloober Team here. I've always liked them, even when they were making some sort of mediocre games, and since they absolutely nailed the Silent Hill 2 remake, I was really excited for Cronos. But at the same time, it's hard to ignore the flaws. The story is underwhelming, the runtime is bloated, and the fear factor fades extremely early, and then on top of that, bugs and crashes just chip away at the experience even more. I genuinely admire the ambition, the idea of making a 16-hour survival horror game. That is a bold swing, but if you're going to take that kind of a risk, you need a stronger narrative to hold it together, and you need to keep the scares alive the whole way through. Without those, the length just becomes more of a liability than a strength. For fans of survival horror like myself, Cronos is actually a pretty easy recommendation. There is a lot to appreciate, and when it works, it really works. But it's not a modern classic, and in a genre that's stacked with them, that's a pretty tough spot to be in as an action/survival horror title. Thank you for making it to the end of the video. I hope that you did enjoy it. If you did, then please consider leaving a like, as it really does help me out. And if you want to see more videos from me, then please consider subscribing. Remember, we're trying to get to 2,000 subscribers by the end of the year. Your help would mean the world to me, but for now, that is all. I will see you in a few days for the next spooky season episode. We will be looking at, unless something goes horribly wrong, Silent Hill F. So make sure to subscribe so you don't miss that. But for now, that is all. Have a nice day, and goodbye.